Okay, welcome to part 3 of test number 2 from book number 16. This is a listening lesson. Remember, please make sure that if you want to do a listening under exam conditions, then this is not the video for you, because we will be stopping. We will be talking about words halfway through. We will be discussing perhaps phrases and grammar as well that are useful for you, as well as the techniques and the thought processes that I'm going through as we do this task. Okay, so the most important thing right now, and I had a listener or a subscriber ask me for this, is to think about what is going through my head as somebody who's ready to do an IELTS exam, especially they're listening. What is going through my head when I'm getting ready for the next stage? Okay, so we've looked at parts 1 and 2 in the previous videos, and we get half a minute, sorry, between each one to check your answers from the previous stage. But really, how much checking can you do? If you don't know the spelling by now, there's not much you can do about it. Your checking will, if you do want to double check things, I would do that at the end of the exam. You've still got 10 minutes. At the end of the exam, when the audio is finished, you've got 10 minutes to transfer your answers from the question paper that you've been using as a sort of notepad over to the more official answer sheet, where you write very carefully and you write with in full capital letters, ideally, to make it very clear. Remember, this is being checked by a computer. Only texts that are very difficult to read is checked by a human, but if it's checked by a computer, it's very unlikely that you're going to make any mistakes if you use, well, not mistakes, but the computer's not going to make any mistakes with your writing if you use capital letters. So not E like this, but E like this, right? For example. Okay, so you've got 30 seconds. It says in the audio, check your answers from part 2, but no, we're not going to do that. We'll do that at the end. You're going to be going, as soon as part 2 is finished, you're going to be moving on to part 3 and getting yourself ready for it. You're going to be looking through any words or phrases that are useful for you so that you are clear with what is going to be coming up in the next part. So this is what we've got. We've got an assignment on sleeps and dreams. Very often what happens in part 3 is that it's two, or sometimes three, but usually two students discussing some sort of assignment that they've been given by their lecturer. It's usually academic focused. So in this case, we can see that it's something about some sort of assignment that they've been given, and an assignment is something that it's graded, it's marked by a professor or a teacher, and maybe they're in some sleep and dreams, so they could be in a psychology class, could be sleep and dreams, and they're discussing this assignment that they've been given by their teacher or their lecturer or their professor. Okay, and what do we do next? So I've got this idea in my head. I've got a general idea of what I'm going to be listening to, two people talking, often female and male. And once I've created that general idea in my head, then I would go on to looking at important words and phrases. Now, I've said this a few times now. If this was the reading, I would say do not look at A, B, and C, because they are trying to distract you, or at least two of them are trying to distract you. In the reading, there's 4 options. 3 of them are trying to distract you, but this is a listening, and it's not as tricky as the reading in terms of trying to distract you so much. So I do suggest that you look through all 3 now. Having done this exam so many times, I actually realized that I was making my life more difficult by not looking at the options A, B, and C, and only looking at the prompt. Remember, the prompt is this first bit here. So I do recommend we look at them, but briefly. We spend most of our time on the prompt, the first bit up here. So Luke, that's the boy, we can assume, yeah, there's typical. It's the male and the female. It's very common. So the male read that one reason why he forgot about dreams, we forgot about dreams. Sorry, what am I talking about? One reason that we often forget dreams is that. Okay, so Luke has read this. We forget dreams is that. So it's memories, too much info. We confuse what is real and do not think important. Oops, Okay, right, very quick with that one. Next one. What do Luke and Susie agree? Look for the verbs in these parts because it's the verbs. That's why I've underlined read. He's read this. We're going to be hearing, he's going to say the words like, I found a book that said, or they might even use the word, I read that. So you're ready to listen for what he's talking about. So they agree. So we're listening for, oh, don't you think, oh, I do agree with you, or I completely, I'm on your side with that, or there's all sorts of synonyms for the word agree. Predicting the future. Okay, so it's chance, only happens certain types of event, happens more often than people think. Okay, 23. Susie, now we're on to only the girl, the female, says that a study, preschool children, nap. Okay, nap is a short sleep. It's a daytime. I don't nap at night. Well, I might, but it's very unusual. A nap is a short sleep. It had controversial results. So some people saw this result, some others saw that result. So no one agreed. Faulty methodology for researching, and it failed to reach any clear conclusions. Actually, A and C are very similar. Controversial, but failed to reach any clear conclusions. Controversial means people discussed it. Failed to reach clear conclusions means there was no clear conclusion. There was no real understanding about what the results were. Okay, so this means people discussed. This means there's nothing to discuss because it's not clear. 24. In their last assignment, both students had problems. Okay, with statistics, make an action plan, and self-assessment. So looking back at what they had produced and deciding whether it was good or bad. Okay, let's just listen for how far we're allowed to go with this. It might say read questions 21 to 20. Yeah, might even go beyond that, but I doubt it. In this case, it's more likely they're going to say, okay, listen out for 21 to 24. Okay. Right. Oops. And I don't know where the controls have gone.
Part 3. You will hear two psychology students, called Luke and Susie, discussing their assignment on sleep and dreams. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24.
Okay. All right, so we've already looked at that, so we don't need to waste time. Let's go straight on.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
So, Luke, for our next psychology assignment, we have to do something on sleep and dreams.
Right. I've just read an article suggesting why we tend to forget most of our dreams soon after we wake up. I mean, most of my dreams aren't that interesting anyway. But what it said was that if we remembered everything, we might get mixed up about what actually happened and what we dreamed. So it's a sort of protection. I hadn't heard that idea before. I'd always assumed that it was just that we didn't have room in our memories for all that stuff.
Me too. What do you think about the idea that our dreams may predict the future?
It's a belief that you get all over the world.
Yeah. Lots of people have a story of it happening to them. But the explanation I've read is that for each dream that comes true, we have thousands that don't, but we don't notice those. We don't even remember them. We just remember the ones where something in the real world, like a view or an action, happens to trigger a dream memory.
Right. So it's just a coincidence.
Oh, so sorry.
Story of it happening to them. But the explanation I've read is that for each dream that comes true, we have thousands that don't.
Okay, so with each dream that comes true, we have thousands that don't. Okay, so already I'm starting to see that it's closer to A. It happens more often than people think might be the one. I don't think it's B. We haven't heard her talking about that yet.
But we don't notice those. We don't even remember them. We just remember the ones where something in the real world, like a view or an action, happens to trigger a dream memory.
Happens to trigger. Okay, this is a useful grammar to know also in your speaking. Okay, and that means when I use happens to, something happens to do something. Something happens to do something. Oops. It means something happens at the same time as something else, and that is a chance. So we've got this word chance, happenstance, really, if you really want to know, is an old word for chance. Okay, and so the word happen is perhaps, the word perhaps comes from perchance, but perchance is very old English. We do say, some older people might say, perchance you would have, but we much more commonly say perhaps. So this word happens relates to the word chance. So what happened means really what were the chances of that going on. Okay. But obviously what happens now, what happened is much more common in English to mean what's going on or what happened, what occurred. Okay, now my audio has disappeared, so 1 second. Okay, on top is okay, so it just happens due to chance. I'm related to A. I think A is the last one.
Right. So it's just a coincidence, really.
Okay, if something happens to do something, it's a coincidence. That's another word. And we'll put that up there for you, coincidence.
Something else.
And she says, so you need to know the words like means yes. Okay. And so coincidence, chance, happenstance, all of these are pointing to A. Okay. Now he moves on. Can you hear the intonation? Let's move it back.
So it's just a coincidence, really. Something else I read about is what they call segmented sleeping. That's a theory that hundreds of years ago, people used to get up in the middle of the night and have a chat or something to eat, then go back to bed. So I tried it myself.
Why?
Well, it's meant to make you more creative.
Okay, so this is something that's happening in between 22 and 23. He's talking about the segmented sleeping, and that's Luke talking. So we can take a little bit of a break now, because as long as we hear that it's a male talking, we know that it's not Susie says. You might even want to go on to over here and have a look quickly at some of the words here while he's talking. But prick up your ears, get ready to listen as soon as Susie takes over.
I don't know why, but I gave it up after a week. It just didn't fit in with my lifestyle.
But most preschool children...
Okay, well, you wouldn't have much time because now she's moved on to most preschool children. Having a short nap in the day, okay.
have a short sleep in the day, don't they? There was an experiment some students did here last term to see at what age kids should stop having naps, but they didn't really find an answer. They spent a lot of time working out the most appropriate methodology, but the results didn't seem to show any obvious patterns.
Right.
Okay, so they spent a lot of time making sure that their research was good, their methodology was good. No one was discussing or arguing at the end, so it can't be A, so it can only be C. Oops.
Anyway, let's think about our assignment. Last time I had problems with the final stage.
Okay, so he had problems with the final stage, which was?
Where we had to describe and justify how successful we thought we'd been. I struggled a bit with the action.
Okay, how we thought we'd been. So this is self-assessment. He's talking about it. But be careful. It says both student. So Does she agree or does she find something difficult?
And plan 2.
I was okay with the planning,
Okay.
but I got marked down for the self-assessment as well. And I had big problems with the statistical stuff. That's where I really lost marks.
Right.
Whoops. Okay, that's strange. Let's go back again and listen.
Last time I had problems with the final stage, where we had to describe and justify how successful we thought we'd been.
Okay, that's talking about self-assessment. Describe how successful we had been. That is self-assessment. She says,
I struggled a bit with the action plan too.
okay, and he said also I struggled with the action plan. So he had problems here and he had problems here. The lady, Susie, the woman
I
said,
was okay with the planning,
okay, I was okay with the planning, so it wasn't B, but
I got marked down for the self-assessment as well.
I got marked down, got a lower mark for the self-assessment, so it can only be C.
And I had big problems with the statistical stuff. That's where I really lost marks.
Right.
That's where I really lost marks. And he says, right. Now, right, and that means, does not mean me too. It means, oh, that's interesting. Or, yeah, sorry to hear. Something like that. So it's not statistics, sorry. Okay, now they're going to give you, it looks like, wow, 30 seconds. Just looking by the gap there, they're going to give you 30 seconds to look at the next part. So we'll let it run and see.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30.
25 all the way to 30. Okay, so assignment plan. So that's the plan that they're looking at for this assignment. Relationship between hours of sleep, number of dreams. 12 students from the department. Okay, so that's going to be a name. So 14. Decide on procedure. Answers on. Check ethical guidelines for working with.
Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Okay, see how quick they are. I'm very lucky in that this is a listening lesson, so I can stop and think about it. And we'll look at some useful words here before we rush on. Okay, so is there a relationship? This should be clear for you. Okay, this one is decide on a sample. A sample is the group of people you're going to be testing your theory on. Okay, so we've got 12 people from some sort of department. This should be an easy one. Okay, I underline that because I want to know where I am. So I'll hear the word self-reporting or some synonym for self-reporting. I decide on the procedure, so answers on. Oh, that's a tricky one. I don't even think what that might be. Check ethical guidelines for working with. So this could be working with children or working with sleeping people who they're not conscious. All sorts of things that might be ethically wrong by. Well, let's have a look at the word ethics over there so you can see what I mean. And guidelines, it should be clear where you're allowed to go and where you're not allowed to go. Ensure that risk is assessed, okay, and is kept to a minimum. Okay, so something negative, it's going to be a negative thing, is kept to a minimum. Then you analyze, so you calculate the correlation. Okay, correlation. There's two words there, co, and there's double R for some reason, but it's correlation. So a correlation can be, for example, let's say life expectancy and wealth, right? So if we have rich people and we have life expectancy, that's a correlation. They correlate, they work together. So the wealthier you are tends to be how much longer you live. There's a correlation there. Obviously, it wouldn't start at naught. It looks more like this, probably. Okay. Okay, and make calculate the correlation and make a This could be a graph. Make a graph, maybe. And then something research. Report back. How many words were you allowed to use? That's a very important word. Very important question. Only one word. So, something research must be a verb. We need to listen for that carefully. Okay, let's start.
So, shall we plan what we have to do for this assignment?
Okay.
First, we have to decide on our research question. So, how about, is there a relationship between hours of sleep and number of dreams?
Okay. Then we need to think about who we'll do the study on. About 12 people?
Right. And shall we use other psychology students?
Let's use people from a different department. What about history?
Yes, they might have interesting dreams. Or literature students.
I don't really know any.
Okay, forget that idea. Then we have to think about our methodology. So we could use observation, but that doesn't seem appropriate.
No. It needs to be self-reporting, I think. And we could ask them to answer questions online.
But in this case, paper might be better, as they'll be doing it straight after they wake up. In fact, while they're still half asleep.
Right. And we'll have to check the ethical guidelines for this sort of research.
Because our experiment involves humans, so there are special regulations.
Yes. I had a look at those for another assignment I did. There's a whole section on risk assessment, and another section on making sure they aren't put under any unnecessary stress.
Let's hope they don't have any bad dreams.
Yeah.
Then, when we've collected all our data, we have to analyse it and calculate the correlation between our two variables. That's time sleeping and number of dreams. And then present our results visually in a graph.
Right, and the final thing is to think about our research and evaluate it. So that seems quite straightforward.
Yeah. So now let's...
Okay, right. We went all the way through, straight through on that one. So think about the research. That's what he said initially, but remember, only one word. So if you didn't read the rubric carefully, you might put think about, but the word really is evaluate. Think about, evaluate. Think about is the phrasal verb, which comes from the Germanic side of English, and evaluate is the Latin-based word, single word only. Okay, so they were thinking about the literature department, but the problem was that they didn't know anybody. Well, at least he didn't know anybody from the literature department. Obviously, they've got friends in the history department, so they can ask them to help with this. Note, they did say online, tricky one, right? Online means on the internet, but they'd just be working up. So if you've just woken up from a dream, you don't want to have to turn on your computer or go to your phone and fill in information online. Notice online is a single word, so answers on and then a second word line would not work either because it's a single word. So on paper, because just as they wake up, there's a piece of paper next to them in the bed and they can write their responses on that. Okay, ethical guidelines for working with humans, right? So we were thinking about children, we were thinking about sleeping people, but obviously there's things you have to follow if you work with humans, other people, right? Let's listen for how they said minimum with the word stress.
We could use observation, but that doesn't seem appropriate.
No. It needs to be
Better, as they'll be doing it straight after they wake up. In fact, while they're still half asleep.
Right. And we'll have to check the ethical guidelines for this sort of research.
Because our experiment involves humans, so there are special regulations.
Yes. I had a look at those for another assignment I did. There's a whole section on risk assessment.
Okay, risk is assessed. The noun for assessed is assessment. So we're listening for these not just synonyms, but word changes as well.
And another section on making sure they aren't put under any unnecessary stress.
To be put under unnecessary stress. Unnecessary relates slightly to the word minimum, keep something to a minimum. They're not put under unnecessary stress, so there we've got the word stress.
Let's hope they don't have any bad dreams.
Yeah.
Okay, right, so correlation, remember there it is, and amazingly enough, the best way to show a correlation is on a graph, visually. They say the word visually. Let's write that up there, visually. And which is why we were lucky with that. And then I've already spoken about evaluate. Okay, so that's part 3. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section below, and look out for part 4, which I'll be releasing tomorrow. Thank you.